Veltria IV was a quiet colony, a green jewel in the outer rim where farms stretched to the horizon and the skies glowed with twin suns. People lived simple lives there, growing food, raising families, and trading minerals from the nearby moon. They had no army, no defense fleets, and no reason to expect danger. But danger came anyway. It began when the stars dimmed, not from nightfall. The colony's orbital satellites went blind first, one by one, followed by the mining outposts on the moon. Their final messages were filled with static, screams, and clicks that didn't sound natural. The colony governor, a pale-skinned Corellian named Sarvak, stood frozen in the command center, watching the last satellite feed before it went dead. It showed a massive black shape like a living mountain moving through space without engines, dragging debris and broken ships behind it. No one knew what it was, only that it was alive, and it was coming. They sent out a distress signal, standard SOS frequency, reaching out to anyone who could hear. "This is Veltria IV," it said. "We are under attack by unknown biological forces. Request immediate assistance. Coordinates attached." Then they waited. For days, silence answered. The Galactic Council acknowledged receipt of the signal, but quickly ruled that the system was too remote and the enemy, whoever they were, too dangerous. They declared Veltria IV a quarantine zone. No aid would come. No fleets. No heroes. Only silence and the sound of wind across empty fields. The colonists knew they would die there. People began preparing for the worst, digging bunkers, sending their children into the deep caves. Some prayed. Others cried. The sky turned red as the enemy moved closer. In orbit, long black ships, shaped like thorns and bones, began surrounding the planet. From their bellies poured swarms of creatures, like living knives with wings, blotting out the stars. The creatures did not speak. They did not pause. They simply fell from the sky and began tearing into anything alive. Defense drones were crushed in seconds. Outposts went dark. Screams echoed through the forests. The colony's last command post activated its emergency beacon, a repeating signal, "We're being wiped out. Is anyone out there? Please help." And then something happened. Something strange. The stars shimmered, and not from flame or wreckage, but from movement. New ships entered the system, massive, silent, and unlike anything the Corellians had ever seen. They were not beautiful or elegant like the Council's cruisers. These were blunt, black-hulled monsters, bristling with guns, engines, and scars. They moved with purpose and precision, ignoring the wreckage and signals. Every sensor on Veltria IV went wild trying to identify them, but the ships didn't broadcast standard codes. Their shapes were unfamiliar. But one word appeared on every scan, Terran. Humanity. The Deathworlders. The ones from Earth. A planet so dangerous most species avoided it on sight. According to legend, humans had vanished a century ago after a brutal war on their own world. No one had seen them since. Some thought they'd gone extinct. Others believed they had simply gone silent. But now they had returned. And they had not come to negotiate. As the black ships settled into orbit, dropships launched, fast and silent, falling like meteors toward the hive zones. No warning was given. No message sent until, suddenly, all channels were overridden. A voice spoke in Galactic Common, clear and hard like steel. "Humanity received your SOS. Evacuate all non-combatants. We are not here to rescue. We are here to end this." The message repeated once, then cut off. In the command center, Governor Sarvak stared at the screen, heart pounding. "What does that mean?" One of the officers whispered. No one answered. Outside, the sky roared. Human dropships broke the sound barrier, shattering windows as they deployed metal giant soldiers in massive armored suits, moving in squads, guns glowing with blue fire. The colonists watched from bunkers and rooftops as these silent figures advanced into the burning cities without fear. Where hive creatures rushed them, the humans fired precision weapons that tore through bone and shell. Their machines did not slow, did not pause, did not retreat. They walked through flames and acid storms like walking tanks. No one had ever seen soldiers like them. Even the hive creatures, so terrifying before, seemed to hesitate when the humans marched toward them. It was not a rescue. It was an extermination. The humans did not set up aid stations or establish safe zones. They secured key structures, established field artillery positions, and began carving through the enemy like they had done it 100 times before. The colonists were told to stay underground. They obeyed. But from the shadows, many watched, awed, confused, and afraid. Who were these people? Why had they come? What did they want? Governor Sarvak tried to open a direct line to the human command ship, but there was no reply. Only silence and more troop movements. Then the ground shook. On the moon, the hive's main nest had been growing for weeks, a living fortress of twisted flesh and bone. Without warning, a single human frigate, shaped like a spear, plunged into low orbit and fired something deep into the moon's crust. 5 minutes later, the entire moon erupted in fire and debris. It cracked, folded in on itself, and then exploded in silence. The shockwave rippled across the system. The hive fleet scattered. The humans did not celebrate. They simply moved to the next target. Sarvak watched the debris field in horror and awe. He realized then this was not a rescue mission. This was a hunt. The humans had not come to save lives. They had come to erase a threat. Efficiently. Permanently. Words spread through the colony and across neighboring systems. The Deathworlders had returned, and they had answered the call not with sympathy, but with fire. Sarvak stood alone on the ridge above the colony, staring at the dark ships in the sky, and whispered, "What kind of monsters answer a cry for help with a fleet of war?" But deep down, a small part of him, the part that remembered the terror of being abandoned, felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe monsters were exactly what they needed. The sky over Veltria IV remained dark, but not because of the enemy. Now it was covered by massive black warships, hulking giants of metal, engines glowing faint red, their shapes sharp and terrifying like deep-sea predators risen to the stars. They floated in perfect formation, silent and still, like they were waiting for a signal only they could hear. People on the ground stared up in fear and awe, unsure whether these war machines were humanity's angels or demons. No one dared speak loudly inside the bunkers, not when those ships hovered above them like floating cities of judgment. Governor Sarvak stood in the colony's command bunker, eyes locked on the monitors as more and more of the Deathworlder fleet arrived. None of the colonists knew how many humans there were, or how they had come so fast, or how they had passed through the Corellian quarantine undetected. What they did know was that these ships weren't just here to scare the enemy. They were preparing for war, and not just any war, but a total, brutal, calculated kind of war that no one had seen in a generation. From the ship's hangars, hundreds of smaller vessels launched drones, dropships, armored gunboats, and strange machines that seemed half alive and half metal. They moved with deadly precision, not a single unit out of place. There was no music, no speeches, no bright flags. Only strategy, movement, and silence. The colonists could see human soldiers walking out of the dropships, each one covered head to toe in dark armor, their faces hidden behind black helmets with glowing red visors. Their suits were bulky but moved with unnatural smoothness, as if they were part of the soldiers' bodies. These weren't volunteers or fresh recruits. They were trained killers, part of a force born for destruction. Sarvak tried again to open communication with the fleet, but once again, there was no response. The only thing they ever heard was that first message, repeating once every few hours on all channels, "Evacuate all non-combatants. We are not here to rescue. We are here to end this." It was not a promise. It was a warning. Outside the cities, where the hive creatures had made nests in forests and tunnels, the first phase of the human assault began. The humans didn't charge like wild beasts. They advanced like a machine, each team moving in coordination with aerial drones, heavy artillery, and satellite support. They marked every tunnel, mapped every cave, and sent in specialized units to clear them. Sometimes, the colonists heard strange humming sounds before bright flashes lit up the horizon, energy weapons or bombs that tore holes in the ground like lightning from the gods. Every battle was short. Every result was final. Human mechs, tall, bipedal walking tanks stomped across the ruined farmlands, their arms loaded with cannons and flamethrowers. They sprayed the sky with fire when winged hive creatures attacked from above, and not a single one fell. On the ground, human engineers deployed walls, turrets, and field bases in minutes, securing zones faster than anyone believed possible. There were no pauses for sleep, no celebrations, no songs. Just a relentless push forward, like they knew time was against them and they had trained their whole lives for this one fight. And yet, even with all their strength, the humans didn't seem proud. They looked tired, cold, focused, as if they had seen this kind of horror before and had no energy left for anything except making sure it never happened again. The colonists, still hiding in bunkers, began to whisper among themselves. Stories spread about soldiers who walked through acid storms and came out untouched, about snipers who never missed, about medics who saved lives by replacing shattered limbs in seconds. Some swore they saw humans talking to their weapons or receiving orders from voices inside their helmets. Others believed the humans had no real commanders at all, that their entire fleet was run by artificial intelligence. But no one could confirm anything because the humans refused to speak. Not even once. Until the third night. That's when Sarvak finally received a visitor. The door to the command bunker opened, and in walked a tall figure in full armor, carrying a rifle taller than a child. The helmet visor retracted slowly, revealing a human man with a long scar down his cheek and gray in his beard. His eyes were cold, not cruel, but sharp, like a man who had stared death in the face so many times that it no longer impressed him. He introduced himself simply, Colonel Riker, Ground Commander, Terran Extermination Fleet. Sarvak tried to speak, but Riker raised a hand and cut to the point. We are here to eliminate the hive species. We don't require assistance. We don't need supplies. Your people should remain underground. When it's over, we'll leave. Sarvak asked why the humans had come, especially after the council had refused. Riker looked at him for a long moment, then said, because we remember what it's like to scream and be ignored. With that, he left, walking back into the war without waiting for thanks. The next morning, the humans launched a massive strike against the main hive fortress at the equator. Satellites picked up movement as entire sections of the ground lifted open, revealing tunnels filled with creatures. The humans didn't wait. They bombed the entire region from orbit with bunker busters and seismic warheads. Then, as the ground split and trembled, they sent in squads on foot. It made no sense to the colonists why risk lives after such heavy bombing, but Riker's voice answered over the secure line. They always survive the first hit. That's why we go in. As human soldiers vanished into black tunnels, the world above held its breath. Explosions lit up the sky. Hive creatures screamed and burned. And deep underground, Riker's team planted a device that shook the entire continent. The hive nest imploded on itself, collapsing with such force that the shockwave knocked out comms for an hour. When the signal returned, Riker's voice came through again, calm as before. Target eliminated. Moving to secondary zone. That day, the colonists realized something terrifying and comforting at the same time. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They weren't even just human anymore. They were something else, something forged in fire, sharpened by endless war, and now unleashed with only one purpose, to destroy the things that hunted others. The hive had brought terror, silence, and death. But the humans had brought something older and colder. A different kind of silence. One that came after the guns stopped firing, after the ground stopped shaking, after the enemy was gone forever. The silence of nothing left to fear. The battle at the equator had ended, but the air still smelled like smoke and burning metal. The ground was cracked and blackened where the hive nest had collapsed, leaving only ash and silence behind. No hive creatures stirred, no tunnels reopened, and no sound came from the ruined forest. But even in victory, the humans did not stop. They moved quickly to the next region, as if the war was chasing them from behind. From orbit, new waves of Terran forces landed with quiet precision. Some built machines that drilled deep into the crust to scan for more nests. Others unloaded mobile med stations, not to treat the colonists, but their own wounded. For the first time, the people of Veltria IV saw that the Deathworlders were not unbreakable. Their soldiers bled, limped, and sometimes did not return. But no one cried, and no one hesitated. Inside the main human command post, built over the bones of the Hive's largest creature, Colonel Riker, stood before a digital map filled with red lights. His face was still and cold, but his eyes were tired. A group of Corellian observers had arrived from a nearby system, ignoring the Council's orders, curious to witness the humans for themselves. Among them was Elder Tovek, a historian who had studied pre-Silence human history and never thought he'd meet one in person. Now he sat across from Riker, trying to understand what kind of species would turn an SOS call into a war campaign. Riker did not waste time with introductions. He simply pointed to the map and said, "There are still 3 hive zones left. After that, we glass the orbit and wipe the spores." Tovak asked why. Why not just destroy the surface nests and leave? Why go to such violent extremes? Riker looked at him, unmoving, and said something that silenced the room. "Because we've made the mistake of mercy before." The Corellians didn't understand. Tovak pressed for answers, and slowly, Riker explained. Over a century ago, before the Silence, the Hive creatures had come to Earth. They didn't come with ships or warnings. They landed on one continent and began spreading, killing, infecting, growing. Humanity didn't believe it at first. They tried to talk, to study, to contain, but the Hive only saw them as food. In the end, 3 billion people died before humanity accepted what needed to be done. They didn't just fight back, they scorched cities, detonated entire oceans, and burned the infection from the planet. The war had changed them forever. They left Earth after that, hunting every trace of the Hive across distant stars. Tovak listened, horrified. "And you've been at war ever since?" Riker nodded. "We tried peace once. It got our children eaten." For a moment, the Corellians saw past the armor and the coldness. They saw a species that had been pushed beyond survival into something else, something harder. Not heartless, but forced to build walls around their hearts just to keep going. Outside, another explosion echoed as a Hive creature tried to breach a human outpost. Seconds later, a plasma strike from orbit erased the area. There was no hesitation. Riker received a message on his console and frowned. A unit of human soldiers had entered a tunnel complex in Zone 3, but hadn't returned. Communication had gone dark. A new type of Hive bioweapon was suspected. Riker made the call, "Instantly send in a containment team." But if the signal confirmed biocorruption, no rescue was permitted. Tovak asked, "What do you mean, no rescue? What if they're alive?" Riker's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we honor their sacrifice by making sure it doesn't spread." The Corellians watched in silence as a small team entered the tunnel. Minutes passed. Then came the signal, a mutated reading, showing rapid DNA alteration in the missing unit. The containment team confirmed visual of infected humans, now moving like the Hive, their bodies twisted and wrong. Riker didn't flinch. He ordered an immediate nuclear strike on the zone. The Corellians protested, calling it cruel. Riker only said, "They would have done the same for me." Fireball lit the sky. The tunnel, the infected, and everything around it was gone in seconds. The Corellians said nothing after that. They realized the humans did not fight for victory. They fought to prevent something worse. That night, Tovak walked through the human camp alone. He saw soldiers silently cleaning their weapons, medics treating burns without complaint, engineers checking artillery by hand. He saw no joy, no hatred, only duty, cold, sharp, and heavy. He found Riker sitting outside his command tent, staring up at the stars. Tovak approached and asked softly, "Why do you do this? You could have stayed away. Let the Hive take us. No one would have blamed you." Riker's answer was not what he expected. Because when we were screaming into the dark, no one came. Not one ship. Not one offer of help. So we decided we'd never be that kind of species. Tovak sat beside him in silence. He now understood. The humans weren't here because they loved war. They were here because they knew the pain of being abandoned. Their mercy wasn't soft. It was sharp. It looked like bombs and fire, because that was the only mercy the Hive could understand. Back in the bunker, human scientists worked to extract DNA samples from captured Hive pieces. They didn't speak much, only shared data through digital pulses. One of them paused when a strange pattern appeared, something that hinted the Hive was changing, adapting. Riker was informed immediately. The war wasn't over. The Hive was learning. The humans would have to move faster. The next day, Riker gave the order to begin orbital bombardment of all remaining Hive zones. No more ground attacks. No more risk of infection. The war would be finished from above. The colonists, now slowly emerging from their bunkers, watched the sky as pillars of fire rained down. Forests burned. Mountains collapsed. The planet wept under the weight of survival. And in the end, as the last Hive signal went dark, the human fleet prepared to leave. They left no flag, no monument, only craters, ash, and silence. But in that silence, there was safety. Governor Sarvak stood at the edge of the colony, watching the last human ship rise. He whispered, "They saved us, and they never asked for anything." Tovak stood beside him and replied, "They didn't come to be thanked. They came so no one else would feel what they once felt." And far above, in the cold black sky, the war fleet turned toward the next star. Already chasing another scream in the dark .as, the Terran fleet began to pull away from Veltria, IV heading toward the outer edge of the system. Alarms started ringing across every deck of the command ship, T.N.S. Wrathborn. What should have been the final withdrawal turned into chaos within seconds. A new signal was detected deep beneath the crust of the planet, far below even the deepest scans made during the war. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow but growing stronger. At first, the scientists thought it was just a leftover Hive echo, some biological noise from a dying nest. But then the readings changed. The signal wasn't just alive, it was communicating across frequencies the Hive had never used before. It wasn't just calling to local creatures, it was reaching into space. A transmission burst through subspace channels, bouncing off satellites and disappearing into the black void beyond the system. Something was waking up, something old and buried so deep that not even the Hive Queens knew about it. Colonel Riker stood on the bridge of Wrathborn, staring at the display that showed the planet's core shifting. For the first time in days, his hands tightened on the railing. Below Veltria IV's surface, something massive began to rise, pushing through rock and molten earth like a great beast long forgotten. The humans had believed they'd won. They'd destroyed every visible hive. But now it was clear those hives had been nothing more than children. Scouts. The real enemy had been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to be born. The signal they'd picked up from the core wasn't just a warning, it was an activation. The planet itself had become a weapon. Giant cracks tore across them. Landscape as fire and ash erupted into the sky. The colonists screamed and ran for cover as the ground shook like a living thing. Massive structures began to rise from the cracks, black, spiny towers that twisted toward the heavens. They were not natural. They were part of the hive, ancient structures hidden for millennia, powered by energy drawn from the core itself. From these towers came new forms of hive creatures, taller, faster, smarter. They had armor like obsidian and eyes that glowed with intelligence. These were not mindless beasts. They were soldiers. And behind them, something worse was forming, a hive mind unlike any humanity had faced before. On the ship, Riker issued an immediate lockdown of the evacuation zones. Veltria IV was now a no-fly zone. He ordered the fleet to enter full combat formation. This would not be another extermination, it would be a battle for survival. The Corellians, still aboard their observation vessel, pleaded with Riker to pull back and save what forces he had left. But Riker shook his head. If we leave now, this thing grows. Spreads. finds another world. We finish it here, or we start a war that never ends. He transmitted a signal to the rest of the fleet code name Hellgate Protocol. It was a command rarely used and only in the most extreme cases. It gave every ship authorization to use their highest-level weapons without council approval. As the fleet turned back toward the burning world, the stars above Veltria IV shimmered with power. Ships the size of mountains lined up, preparing for a bombardment that would crack the planet open if needed. But even as they charged their weapons, the Hive struck first. Spires on the surface fired dark energy beams into orbit, cutting through human frigates like paper. One cruiser exploded in a burst of light, sending wreckage spinning into space. The Hive had learned, adapted, and it was no longer limited to the ground. They had built weapons. Riker's eyes burned as he watched the battle unfold. He barked out orders, shifting formations, moving shield carriers into position, launching drones to map every structure. He knew they were running out of time. If that signal reached deep space, if other Hive seeds awakened, no fleet would be enough. On the planet, human strike teams were deployed again, even though the land burned and the sky was filled with fire. The Deathworlders dropped straight into hell volcanic fields, acid storms, collapsing cities, but they kept moving. Each team had a mission: destroy the Hive towers, no matter the cost. One squad, led by Captain Elira, reached the base of the largest tower and found something unexpected. Inside was not just Hive material, but tech ancient, possibly stolen from another species. The Hive hadn't just evolved, it had harvested intelligence. Elira transmitted images to the command ship, and for a moment, everyone on the bridge went silent. The structure inside the tower looked like a mix of Terran, Corellian, and unknown tech. This Hive hadn't just survived, it had been collecting, learning, improving for centuries. Riker made a choice then. He activated Wrathborn's primary weapon, a gravity lance capable of piercing planetary crust. If they could destroy the core, they might collapse the entire Hive network at once. But there was a catch: the weapon needed to be guided manually from the surface, inside a beacon pod, because the interference from the Hive towers blocked remote targeting. He didn't hesitate. Prep the pod. I'll go. The crew objected. His second-in-command begged him to stay aboard, but Riker only said, "You don't lead from behind." Moments later, he dropped into the fire, riding the beacon pod through a storm of lightning and ash. On the ground, Elira's team cleared a path to the targeting zone, holding off Hive soldiers as Riker landed. His armor scorched, his lungs burning. He reached the center of a shattered plane, where the earth cracked open to reveal glowing red veins of living energy. He planted the beacon and began the upload. But the Hive had sensed him. A new creature rose from the ground, taller than any they had seen before, with long blades for arms and a face that shifted like liquid. It spoke in broken human words, its voice a mimic of every scream ever heard in war. "You are too late." Riker raised his rifle and charged. The final battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like eternity. Steel clashed with claws. Fire rained from the sky. At last, with blood on his visor and the beacon active, Riker sent one last message: now. From orbit, Wrathborn fired the gravity lance. The beam pierced the sky like a sunbeam from hell. It struck the core, and Veltria IV began to fall apart. The Hive screamed as the crust shattered. Towers collapsed. Ash swallowed the land. And in one final moment of light and fury, the planet died. Silence followed. The fleet held position, waiting. Then came a signal, faint but clear. Riker's voice. Target neutralized. Coming home. Cheers erupted across the human ships. The fire was over. But the cost was burned into every survivor's heart. Humanity had won again, but at what price? After Veltria IV broke apart, nothing moved in the sky for several minutes. No ships, no signals, no voices, only the drifting remains of a world torn in half. The Terran fleet hovered at a distance, silent and watching, as the cracked planet slowly lost its shape, glowing from within like the final breath of a dying fire. Chunks of crust floated free into orbit, and red magma leaked into space like bleeding wounds. The hive was gone. The signal had ended. There were no more screams in the system, no more growing pulses beneath the surface. For the first time since the SOS had been sent, there was stillness. Inside the command ship TNS Wrathborn, the bridge was quiet as the crew tried to process what they had done. Commander Vale stood at the front, his hands folded tightly behind his back, eyes locked on the planet's remains. Colonel Riker had made it back. Barely his escape pod had been recovered from orbit, the hull nearly melted, the beacon destroyed from inside. He was alive but unconscious, resting in the medbay under heavy care. The doctors said he had internal injuries, burns, and possible radiation sickness, but knowing Riker, he would be on his feet the moment his eyes opened. Around the fleet, survivors from surface teams were being brought back in small, battered shuttles. Some limped, some were carried, and some didn't return at all. The price of survival was high, and it had left scars on everyone. In the lower hangars, soldiers sat in silence, still in armor, their eyes empty from all they had seen. No cheers filled the air, no celebration. Only quiet nods, shared glances, and the sound of boots echoing on metal floors. Among them were the few surviving colonists, shaken and confused, unsure whether to thank their saviors or fear them. Governor Sarvak was one of them. He stood aboard a Terran escort ship, watching the planet that had once been his home become dust. His face was pale, his hands shaking, and all he could whisper was, "We should have never sent that signal." But Elder Tovak, standing beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder and replied, "No, you should have. Because now we know what's coming." He wasn't speaking of the hive. He was speaking of what lay beyond them. The signal Veltria's core had sent was not just local. Human intelligence had intercepted fragments of it encoded in a language that didn't match known hive speech. Something bigger had heard the message. Somewhere far beyond explored space, something ancient had listened. Humanity had closed one door, but another had cracked open, and what waited on the other side might be worse than the hive. On the Wrathborn, the data team worked in silence, analyzing everything recovered from the hive towers. They found strange patterns, symbols, coordinates, and old star maps. Some matched pre-council records, others pointed toward black zones where nothing had ever been explored. One line of code kept repeating, buried deep inside the hive's neural code, something like a name or a warning. It translated roughly to, "The origin wakes." No one knew what it meant. Not yet. Commander Vale sent a report to Earth, encrypted and classified. The Council would demand answers. The other races would ask why a colony was turned into rubble. But the Terrans would give them no explanation, only a simple message. Threat eliminated. Protocol upheld. War fleet returning. Yet not everyone was returning. Some ships had been lost. Thousands of soldiers were gone. Veltria IV was now a dead system, marked on the map with a red warning, DONOTAPPRO-CH. The fleet prepared to jump, engines warming, but the air still felt heavy. Before departure, a memorial service was held. Not with music or speeches, but with silence. Soldiers stood in rows, helmets tucked under arms, flags folded. In the command room, a list of names scrolled across the screen, the lost, the fallen, the forgotten. They were not praised as heroes. They were remembered as necessary. That was the Terran way. A cost counted, not ignored. When Riker finally woke up, he didn't speak at first. He simply stared at the ceiling of the medbay, breathing in shallow pain. The nurse told him the mission had succeeded. He nodded once, then asked only one thing. What did the signal say? When told it wasn't hive language, it was older Riker's jaw tightened. He already knew. Somewhere in the void, another enemy was watching, and the war wasn't over. Not really. It had only shifted direction. Days later, the fleet jumped, leaving the Veltria system behind. In its place was silence, a silence earned by fire and blood. Across the galaxy, news of what happened spread slowly. Rumors twisted into myths. Some said the Deathworlders had burned a world because they were angry. Others believed the colony had turned into monsters, and the humans had destroyed it to keep it secret. The truth, as always, remained buried beneath layers of politics and fear. But to those who had seen it, to those who had stood on burning ground and looked into the eyes of the hive, it was clear. The humans had not come for glory or revenge. They had come because no one else would. And when the fire had settled, what remained was a message written in silence. If you scream into the dark, humanity will answer. But never ask them to come unless you're ready to pay the price they carry with them. Somewhere far beyond the stars, in a sector uncharted and cold, a new signal blinked to light. Faint, distant, like a heartbeat. The war fleet had moved on, but death had not stopped moving.